Nobody expected Barron Trump to be walking alone on a quiet street in New York City that cold afternoon. But what shocked everyone even more was what happened after he tried to help a homeless man and was turned away. This isn't a story about fame or wealth. It's about what one young man did when his kindness was rejected and how that simple act went on to change lives in ways no one could have imagined. The day had started like any other in the bustling city. Streets were crowded, cars honked endlessly, and people rushed past each other, barely noticing their surroundings. The cold breeze carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from nearby vendors and the distant aroma of coffee from street-side cafes. Barron Trump, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, strolled quietly, blending into the crowd. He wasn't here for anything special. He just enjoyed walking unnoticed, a rare chance to clear his mind and escape the pressures of his well-known family name. As he walked, he thought about how different life was for someone like him. Despite the privileges he often felt isolated. He had always wanted to do something meaningful, something that went beyond just living in the shadow of his famous parents. Today felt like a day to do just that. Turning a corner into a quieter part of town, Barron noticed something that made him pause. Sitting slumped against a brick wall was a man wrapped in a thin, worn-out blanket. His face was weathered, his eyes downcast, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." Passers-by moved quickly past him, avoiding eye contact. It was a common sight in the city, yet most people chose to ignore it. But Barron couldn't just walk by. He slowed down, observing the man for a moment before approaching. As he got closer, he noticed the man's posture, defeated, resigned to his fate. It stirred something in Barron. He knew he had to do something. He approached slowly, kneeling slightly to meet the man's gaze. "Hi," he said gently, his voice calm but sincere. "What's your name?" The man looked up, startled by the unexpected kindness in Barron's tone. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether this was genuine or just another person pretending to care. "Mike," he muttered eventually, his voice gruff but weary. "Mike," Barron repeated with a nod, offering a small smile. "Nice to meet you. Can I do something to help you?" Mike's expression immediately hardened. His eyes narrowed slightly as he clutched his blanket tighter around himself. "You can't help me, kid. Nobody can. Just leave me alone," he said, his tone defensive and rough, as though he had heard false promises too many times before. Barron didn't flinch or react with frustration. Instead, he stayed where he was, his gaze steady. "I'm not here to judge you," he said quietly. "I just want to help if I can." Mike shook his head firmly, turning away slightly. "There's nothing you can do. It's too late for me." For a moment, Barron remained silent, as if weighing his options. He knew he couldn't force someone to accept help, but that didn't mean he had to give up. Finally, he stood up, his expression calm but resolute. "All right," he said softly, "but if you ever change your mind, I'll be around." With that, Barron gave Mike one last respectful nod before walking away. As he continued down the street, his mind raced with thoughts. He felt a deep sense of empathy for Mike, but he also knew that a simple offer of help wasn't enough. This wasn't just about one man. There were countless others like Mike, overlooked and forgotten by a society that moved too fast to care. Barron made a decision right then and there. He couldn't force people like Mike to accept help, but he could create opportunities for those who were ready. He had the resources and connections to make a real difference. He just needed a plan. That night, back in his room, Barron opened his laptop and began researching. He looked up local shelters, charities, and organizations dedicated to helping the homeless. He spent hours making calls, sending emails, and mapping out what would soon become a large-scale outreach event. Over the next few days, Barron worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He secured partnerships with local businesses for food and clothing donations, arranged for medical professionals to offer free checkups, and coordinated with social workers to provide information on housing and job opportunities. Despite his high-profile background, Barron insisted on keeping his identity a secret. "This isn't about me," he told one of the organizers. "It's about them." By Saturday morning, the once quiet street where Barron had met Mike had transformed into a bustling hub of activity. Tables were set up along the sidewalks, offering warm meals, blankets, hygiene kits, and clothing. Medical tents provided free health checkups, while volunteers greeted attendees with warm smiles. The atmosphere was one of hope and community, a stark contrast to the usual indifference of the city streets. Mike arrived early, standing hesitantly at the edge of the event. He looked around, unsure if he belonged there. A volunteer noticed him and approached with a kind smile. "Hey there," she said gently. "You're welcome here. Come on, let's get you something to eat." After a moment of hesitation, Mike accepted the offer. He was handed a hot meal, which he ate quietly at one of the tables. As he finished, another volunteer approached him with an envelope. "This is for you," she said, placing it in his hands. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. "Every life matters. You're not alone. Your friend from the other day." Mike's hands trembled as he read the note. He looked around, scanning the crowd, but he couldn't see Barron anywhere. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe things could change after all. The event was a huge success. Local news outlets covered the story, praising the anonymous donor behind it. Social media was flooded with posts from attendees expressing their gratitude. But for Barron, this was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, similar events began to pop up in other neighborhoods, inspired by the success of the first one. Meanwhile, Mike's life began to improve. With the support he received, he found temporary housing and later secured a part-time job at a local grocery store. Slowly but surely, he began rebuilding his life. Despite Barron's efforts to remain anonymous, his identity eventually came to light when a volunteer recognized him and shared the story with the media. Soon, headlines read, "Barron Trump's quiet campaign to help the homeless inspires a city." When asked about his involvement during an interview, Barron remained humble. "It's not about me," he said simply. "It's about people like Mike. Everyone deserves a second chance, and sometimes all it takes is for someone to care." Months later, Mike stood at the same street corner where he had once sat with his cardboard sign. But this time, he wasn't begging. He was waiting for someone. When Barron arrived, Mike extended his hand, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "You didn't have to do all this," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. Barron smiled and shook his hand firmly. "I didn't do it alone, and you deserve it, Mike. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As they parted ways, Mike's words echoed in Barron's mind. "You changed my life, kid. Don't stop doing what you're doing." And as Barron walked away, he knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Meanwhile, news outlets continued to report on Barron's campaign, sparking a wave of similar initiatives across the country. People from all walks of life were inspired by the story of a young man who chose to act when others looked away. Local communities organized their own outreach events, and social media was flooded with messages of hope, compassion, and solidarity. The story didn't just touch those in New York, it resonated with people everywhere. Barron received letters from strangers, thanking him for reminding them that even small acts of kindness could lead to meaningful change. Many shared their own experiences of hardship and how a single moment of compassion had changed their lives. Encouraged by the response, Barron expanded his efforts. He collaborated with national charities and local governments to launch a series of programs aimed at providing long-term support for the homeless. These initiatives focused on job training, mental health support, and affordable housing, key factors in breaking the cycle of homelessness. Mike, too, became an advocate. With Barron's encouragement, he began volunteering at shelters and speaking at events, sharing his story to inspire others. His journey from despair to hope became a symbol of what could happen when people came together to help those in need. One evening, as they prepared for another event, Mike turned to Barron. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another kid who didn't understand what it was like out here. But you proved me wrong. You didn't just help me, you gave me my life back." Barron smiled, his eyes reflecting both humility and determination. "I didn't do it alone, Mike. It was a team effort, and there's still so much more to do." As the event kicked off, the crowd gathered, filled with people from all walks of life. Families, volunteers, former homeless individuals, and supporters mingled, united by a shared purpose. The atmosphere was one of hope and possibility, a testament to what could be achieved when compassion met action. As Barron took the stage to thank everyone for their support, he looked out at the sea of faces. This wasn't just about helping a few people. It was about changing the way society viewed and treated its most vulnerable members. And in that moment, he knew they were on the right path. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Together, we can create a world where no one is forgotten, where everyone has a chance to rebuild their lives. This is just the beginning. Let's keep going. Together." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing into the night. Barron stepped down, joining Mike and the other volunteers. As they mingled with the attendees, one thing was clear. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a movement, one that would continue to grow, touching countless lives along the way. And so, with every small act of kindness, the ripple effect continued. The story of Barron Trump and Mike became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, compassion and determination could light the way forward.